My name is Louise. I am 30 years old, and this is the story of how my family erased me from their lives with one sentence that still rings in my ears. It happened on Thanksgiving Day. I carried a homemade pecan pie in my arms, the same recipe my grandmother had passed down. I thought it might be the bridge back to the family I was raised in. But when I reached the front steps of my parents' stately Beacon Hill home, the place that had shaped my childhood, the door opened to faces colder than the November air. My father stood firm, his eyes sharp, his voice cutting through me like glass. "You are not invited." For a second I could not breathe. I glanced past him through the sliver of the doorway, and what I saw made the blow even crueler. Laughter, crystal glasses raised, my sister Audrey in her burgundy dress, Uncle William with his habitual glass of scotch, even my best friend Jennifer, the one person I thought would always stand by me sitting in the seat that had always been mine. She avoided my eyes, but her silence screamed louder than words. I shifted the pie in my arms, desperate for some logic, some reason. "I brought dessert," I whispered, hating myself for how small it sounded. Dad's favorite, I wanted to add, but the words stuck in my throat. My father didn't even glance at it. He only shook his head and said, "We have dessert arranged." My mother's hand rested on the frame, her expression so perfectly composed it almost looked rehearsed. "There has been a misunderstanding," she said. "You are not invited this year." That was the moment the floor fell out beneath me. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a last-minute change of plans. It was calculated, planned. They had excluded me, deliberately replaced me with everyone else, including Jennifer, including the very people I once believed had my back. The door shut with a final click. Behind it, voices resumed, music swelled, and life carried on without me. I stood there on the stone steps, my pie growing heavier in my arms, while the reality seeped into my bones. The message was crystal clear. My family had decided that I no longer belonged. I walked back to my car, my legs stiff with pride, refusing to let them see me break down on those stairs. But inside, I was shaking. I placed the pie carefully on the passenger seat and gripped the wheel, staring back at the house that had once been my home. Through the bay window, I could see them gathering around the table, raising glasses beneath a gold banner that read, "Family First." The irony nearly made me laugh. Family first, unless you questioned the status quo, unless you were me. That night, as I sat alone in my car by the Charles River, the shock turned to something else. Not rage that burned fast and wild, but a cold, steady anger, a clarity I had never felt before. They had made their choice, and now I would make mine. Because in that moment, I realized something I should have known years ago. Sometimes family is not defined by blood. Sometimes family is defined by loyalty, by who stands beside you when it costs them something. And on that Thanksgiving Day, my so-called family showed me exactly where their loyalty lay. This was the beginning of the unraveling. The first cut that opened every hidden wound, every betrayal, every secret that had been festering beneath the polished surface of the Matthews name. And I want you to stay with me because what followed after that slammed door would not just destroy the image of a perfect family. It would reveal a truth so staggering, it changed my life forever. My name is Louise, and to understand why being turned away that Thanksgiving hurt so deeply, you need to know the family I come from. I was born into the Matthews household, a name that carried weight in Boston society. Our family home stood tall on Beacon Hill, its brownstone facade as intimidating as the man who ruled it. My father, Harold Matthews, founded Matthews Investment Group 35 years ago. His company was one of the most respected financial firms in the city. He wasn't just successful, he was legendary. To him, success wasn't optional. It was the only outcome acceptable for anyone who bore his name. My mother, Elaine, played a different but equally demanding role. She maintained our family's social standing like a general preparing for battle. Charity galas, dinner parties, board meetings, she curated every moment. She made sure no one ever saw a crack in the Matthews image. A Matthews never shows weakness, she reminded us, whether we were in public or alone at the dinner table. If I cried, she corrected me. If I hesitated, she silenced me. Emotions she believed were flaws that tarnished the brand she had worked so hard to polish. Then there was my sister Audrey, 2 years older Harvard Business School graduate and my father's perfect heir. She slid seamlessly into the company, thriving in every role, always earning praise. If Dad was the architect of our empire, Audrey was his masterpiece. She never questioned, never resisted, never faltered. She was the golden child who wore her crown with ease. I, however, was different. From the start, I had a mind of my own. While Audrey memorized financial models and balance sheets, I was sketching logos and brainstorming campaigns. Marketing fascinated me, the psychology of brands, the way stories shaped perception. To my father, that interest was an embarrassment. Marketing is for people who can't handle real business. He once sneered across the dinner table, his words slicing into me, while Audrey sat silent and unchallenged. Despite his disdain, I carved my path. I studied marketing at Boston University, graduated with honors, and in an effort to prove myself, joined Matthew's investment group anyway. I thought maybe if I worked twice as hard, delivered results, no one could deny he would see me as worthy. For 5 long years, I did just that. I rose to become director of client relations and marketing. I built campaigns that drew in high-profile investors. I stayed late, sacrificed weekends, and lived to hear even the smallest acknowledgement of my value. But in the Matthews family, effort was invisible. Only power mattered. Audrey had it. I didn't. This was the foundation of the fracture that Thanksgiving brought into the open. Every moment of my childhood and early career had been a battle for approval that never came. I was the daughter who had chosen the wrong path, the employee who was tolerated but never respected, the family member who was useful only until she dared to question the system. And so when that door slammed shut in my face, it wasn't just about one dinner. It was the culmination of 30 years of being told subtly, coldly, relentlessly that I would never measure up, that I wasn't one of them, not truly. Before I continue, I want to pause and ask something of you. If you've ever been dismissed by the very people who should have protected you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this aren't just mine, they belong to so many of us. And if you want to keep hearing how this story unfolds, make sure to subscribe. That way you don't miss what happens when loyalty, power, and betrayal collide. Because as much as that night broke me, it was also the night that forced me to see the truth. My family had built its empire on appearances, on control, on fear. And I was about to uncover just how deep those foundations of deception really went. That Thanksgiving rejection was the first domino. What came next would expose secrets that not only shattered my family's name, but also pushed me into a battle I never imagined I'd have the courage to fight. And it all started months before that night, when I stumbled upon numbers in the company's accounts that didn't make sense. Numbers that would lead me down a path of suspicion, betrayal, and ultimately the decision that changed everything. I grew up learning that image was everything. My father's empire thrived on perception, and my mother's life revolved around maintaining it. To outsiders, the Matthews family looked flawless. But inside those walls, every move was a performance. From the time I was a child, my mother corrected me like I was a flawed script in her play. If my laugh was too loud, she silenced it. If my clothes weren't perfect, she changed them. When I once admitted to being nervous before a school presentation, she looked at me with disappointment and said, "A Matthews never shows weakness." That phrase haunted me. It wasn't encouragement. It was a warning: if you falter, you embarrass us all. Audrey, my sister, never faltered. She was born for the role. Elegant, brilliant, driven, everything my parents wanted. She walked straight into Harvard, then into the family firm, never questioning, never hesitating. At dinner parties, she dazzled with stories of her achievements, while I sat quietly, hoping no one would ask me about my less serious degree from Boston University. I tried to play my part. When I joined the firm, I told myself that if I just worked harder, I could prove I belonged. For years, I sacrificed weekends, poured myself into presentations, stayed until midnight perfecting campaigns. But no matter what I did, I was always the other daughter. The one whose victories were treated as flukes. The one my father dismissed with a glance. I remember one dinner vividly. Audrey had just closed a deal worth millions. Everyone toasted her. My father beamed with pride, calling her his true heir. Then he turned to me and asked with mock politeness, "And how are the brochures?" Stephanie, the table, erupted in polite laughter. My cheeks burned, but I forced a smile. I learned that night what my role was: comic relief in my own family. But beneath the glossy veneer, cracks were forming, and I was the only one willing to look at them. Months before Thanksgiving, while preparing for a client presentation, I stumbled across irregularities in several high-profile accounts, transfers to offshore entities, inconsistent returns, patterns that didn't add up. At first, I thought it was an error, but when I brought the files to my father, his reaction chilled me. He didn't even look. He snatched the papers from my hands and snapped, "Some matters are beyond your understanding. Stick to your brochures and leave the real business to those qualified." That moment changed everything. He wasn't surprised, he wasn't confused, he was defensive. He knew exactly what I had seen. After that, doors began to close. My access to files was restricted. Meetings I once led were suddenly reassigned to Audrey. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. It was as if I had crossed an invisible line and in doing so had become an enemy. The strangest betrayal came from Jennifer, my best friend since college. She had joined the firm 2 years after me, quickly becoming part of both the business and my family. My mother called her practically a Matthews. She came to vacation, Sunday dinners, even Thanksgiving. I thought she was my ally. But I began to notice subtle shifts. She grew distant, guarded, sometimes avoiding my calls. I brushed it off at first, blaming work stress. I didn't realize then how deep her role in this story would go. Looking back now, the pieces fit too neatly. My father had started limiting my role. Audrey was shadowing my every move. Jennifer was present at every family dinner, every meeting, always within earshot. It was a chess game, and I was the pawn they were quietly pushing off the board. At the time, I clung to hope. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that I could earn back their trust. That maybe, just maybe, my father would see my worth. But deep down I knew. The Matthews family wasn't protecting its reputation. It was protecting a secret. And my discovery had made me a liability. Have you ever felt like the people closest to you were hiding something right in front of your face? Tell me in the comments if you've ever noticed cracks in a perfect facade and what you did about it. I would love to hear your stories. Because when I saw those files, I didn't just glimpse numbers. I glimpsed the truth: my family's empire was built on lies. Lies they were willing to sacrifice me to protect. And that realization set me on a collision course with everything I thought I knew about loyalty, family, and love. The kind of collision you cannot walk away from unchanged. So, that's when the tension started spiraling into open conflict. My father began questioning my every move, my mother turned colder than ever, and Audrey's shadow loomed larger. What came next was the breaking point, the moment that forced me to make a choice I could never take back. I used to believe that if I worked harder, I could force my father to see me. That illusion shattered the day I uncovered the truth hidden in our company's ledgers. It started innocently. I was preparing slides for a major client presentation. My role was to highlight the firm's stability, its track record, and its stellar returns. I sifted through account statements late into the night, the glow of my desk lamp illuminating columns of numbers. At first it felt routine, but then I noticed movement in several high-profile accounts, irregular withdrawals and deposits, transfers to offshore entities with vague descriptions. Something was wrong. I remember leaning back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, convincing myself I was overthinking. But the patterns were too consistent, too deliberate. It wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was manipulation. My stomach dropped. The next morning, I carried the files into my father's office. His walls were lined with mahogany shelves filled with awards, portraits, and artifacts that screamed power. He looked up from his desk, irritation flashing at the interruption. "What is it?" I laid the papers in front of him. These accounts don't make sense. Large transfers without documentation, inconsistent reporting. I think. He cut me off, his voice sharp. Those accounts are handled personally by me. I blinked. But Dad, the numbers. He snatched the files out of my hands with a speed that startled me. Some matters are beyond your understanding, Stephanie. Stick to your brochures. Leave real business to those qualified. The sting of his words was worse than the dismissal. It wasn't ignorance. It was a warning. He knew exactly what I had seen, and he wanted me silent. After that confrontation, the walls began closing in. My access to files was restricted. Projects I once led were reassigned. Audrey started appearing in meetings that used to be mine. Her presence a silent declaration, you've been replaced. My questions were met with cold looks or outright hostility. And then there was Jennifer, my supposed best friend. She worked in account management close enough to notice the same irregularities. Yet when I mentioned my concerns, she brushed them off with practiced ease. Every big firm has complicated structures. Don't worry about it. Her tone was too polished, too rehearsed. At the time, I thought she was protecting me from paranoia. Later, I realized she was protecting my family from me. The pressure built like a storm cloud. I still remember sitting alone in the company cafe watching employees whisper as I walked past. They knew something I didn't. Or maybe they had been told something about me. Paranoia settled into my bones. At home, I replayed my father's words again and again. Stick to your brochures. It was meant to belittle me. But the more I thought about it, the more it confirmed what I already suspected: he was hiding something, and I was dangerously close to exposing it. That realization should have scared me into silence. Instead, it sparked defiance. If he thought I was unqualified, I would prove him wrong. If he wanted me in the dark, I would dig deeper. But every act of defiance came at a cost. The closer I looked, the more isolated I became. Audrey started confronting me with icy precision. You're imagining things she'd say, sliding into meetings and intercepting clients. My mother tightened her grip on appearances, scolding me for being distracted, for not smiling enough at social functions. You embarrass us when you look unsettled. I was being squeezed out 1 inch at a time, and deep down I knew why. The Matthews family wasn't about protecting truth. It was about protecting power, and I had dared to question it. That period was the turning point. It was no longer about me simply being the lesser daughter. I had become a liability, a threat. And the storm would finally break when I achieved something my father should have celebrated. But instead, it pushed him over the edge. Because against all odds, I landed a client he had chased for years. And instead of applause, I got suspicion, accusations, and the final push out of the company. The breaking point came when I achieved what should have been the proudest moment of my career. I landed Berkshire Development, a client my father had pursued for years. For months, I worked tirelessly crafting a marketing strategy that spoke directly to their needs. Late nights, endless drafts, careful negotiations, all of it culminated in one triumphant signature on the dotted line. I walked into my father's office expecting at least a flicker of pride. Instead, I was met with suspicion. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't even smile. His first words were, "How exactly did you convince Thomas Berkshire to sign with us? What did you promise him?" The accusation hit harder than any insult he had thrown before. I explained that I had built a tailored strategy, that I had done my job. But he wasn't listening. His eyes narrowed, his tone sharpened. Your job is to support this family's interests, not to build your personal portfolio. In that moment, I realized something brutal. To him, my success wasn't success at all. It was betrayal. 2 weeks later, I resigned. Walking out of Matthews Investment Group was both terrifying and liberating. I had poured 5 years of my life into proving myself, and all it earned me was distrust. But leaving meant freedom. I launched Matthews Marketing Consultancy, built on the very relationships I had cultivated. Those clients followed me, not my father, and for the first time I saw the outlines of a future that was mine alone. The family's reaction was swift and merciless. My mother stopped answering my calls. Audrey sent an email filled with venom, accusing me of disloyalty, of tearing apart everything she worked for. My father threatened legal action for client poaching, though his lawyers quickly advised against it. To them, my independence was treason. And yet amid the silence and rejection, one voice remained. My cousin Emma. We would meet for coffee in small cafes, her eyes darting nervously around as if afraid of being seen with me. She whispered updates about the family, warning me of the tension at the firm. They talk about you like you're the enemy now. Something big is happening. Everyone seems on edge. Her words unsettled me, but also confirmed what I already suspected. My departure had shaken more than just family pride. Something beneath the surface was unraveling, and they were desperate to keep me from seeing it. I should have walked away completely, built my new life, and never looked back. But family ties are chains that cut both ways. Even when they strangle, they still pull. So when Thanksgiving approached, I let hope override caution. I called my mother to confirm dinner. Her tone was cool but clear. The usual time, dear. 2:00, and please wear something appropriate this year. I ignored the chill in her voice. I clung to the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, they were ready to forgive. I baked the pecan pie, picked out a sweater my mother had once complimented, and chose a bottle of Cabernet from a client's vineyard. Every detail was deliberate, every choice a peace offering. I told myself that family was everything, that this holiday might be a chance to mend what was broken. But I was wrong. That day would not bring reconciliation. It would bring the cruelest rejection of all. Before I continue, let me pause here. Because I know some of you watching have lived through moments like this where you finally achieved something only to be punished for it. If you've ever been accused of betrayal for simply chasing your own success, I want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments. And if this story resonates, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what happened on that Thanksgiving wasn't just a snub. It was the moment they erased me publicly and deliberately. And the betrayal I uncovered afterward made that cold rejection at the door feel almost merciful in comparison. Walking away from the firm should have been the end. But in my family, walking away was never an option. To them, I hadn't just resigned. I had declared war. The silence was the first weapon. My mother, once the meticulous orchestrator of our every appearance, stopped calling entirely. Weeks passed without a single word from her. The absence was louder than any argument. Audrey, on the other hand, didn't stay quiet. She sent me an email that cut like a knife, filled with accusations of betrayal. She called me selfish, reckless, disloyal. She said I had destroyed the family name. Reading her words felt like losing a sister twice in one lifetime. My father's retaliation was colder, more strategic. He threatened legal action, claiming I had stolen clients. I braced myself for lawsuits, the crushing weight of a legal battle. But his lawyers must have seen the weakness in his case, because the threats evaporated into silence. Still, the damage was done. Every attempt to intimidate me made it clear they had decided I was the enemy. Emma was the only one who dared to stay in touch. We met in quiet corners of cafes, her voice low, her eyes wary. She confided things that chilled me. They talk about you like you're a traitor. Dad says the firm is stretched thin, everyone's tense. Something big is going on, and they don't want you to know. I held on to Emma's words, though they twisted uneasily in my stomach. It wasn't just that they hated me for leaving, they feared me, but still I wanted to believe that blood meant something. When Thanksgiving loomed, I let myself hope. I imagined reconciliation, forgiveness, maybe even a fresh start. I baked my father's favorite pie, chose clothes I knew my mother approved of, and selected wine from a client's vineyard, as if it were a peace treaty. Every detail was deliberate, every gesture a plea for acceptance. In the days leading up to the holiday, I told myself stories to soften the truth. Maybe my mother's silence was her way of punishing me, but she still loved me. Maybe Audrey's cruel words were written in anger, but deep down she wanted her sister back. Maybe my father's threats were just bluster, and he would welcome me once I showed respect at the dinner table. Hope makes fools of us all. On Thanksgiving morning, the city was bathed in unseasonably warm sunshine. I dressed carefully, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and optimism. As I drove to Beacon Hill, I rehearsed conversation starters. I would ask Audrey about her trip to London, compliment my mother's table setting, discuss the Patriots season with Uncle William. I clung to the fantasy that small gestures could repair years of fracture. When I arrived, I recognized the cars lined up outside. Audrey's Range Rover, Uncle William's Mercedes, even Jennifer's blue Audi. That sight unsettled me. Jennifer and I had always arrived together in past years. Why had she come without me? I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the glow spilling from the windows. Candles flickered. Laughter drifted through the glass. For a fleeting second, I thought I belonged again. I carried the pie to the door, adjusted my sweater, and rang the bell. My breath caught when the laughter inside abruptly fell silent. The door opened, and my parents stood there, dressed impeccably, expressions carved from stone. My father's voice was flat, merciless. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for dinner," I answered, confused. "Mom said 2 o'clock." Her manicured hand gripped the frame tighter. "There has been a misunderstanding. You are not invited this year." And just like that, hope died. That rejection was the culmination of months of being cast out, erased piece by piece. It was the moment my family made their choice loyalty to the image, not to me. And as I stood there, pie in hand, watching Jennifer smile from my seat inside, I finally understood. They hadn't just turned their backs on me, they had replaced me. Thanksgiving had always been sacred in our family. My mother spent weeks planning the menu down to the placement of every fork. My father used the occasion as his stage, carving the turkey, with surgical precision raising toasts about loyalty, reminding us that family is everything. For years, even when I felt like the outsider, I still believed in that ritual. It was the one day we would come together, no matter what. That morning, I tried to convince myself it would be the same. Sunshine poured through my apartment windows as I baked the pecan pie, the aroma filling the air like a promise of peace. I chose my outfit carefully, a forest green cashmere sweater, a camel wool skirt. My hairstyled conservatively makeup kept soft and minimal. Every detail was a performance designed to please my mother and disarm my father. I even whispered his favorite phrase as I carried the pie and wine to the car. "Family is everything." The drive to Beacon Hill was short but heavy with rehearsed lines. I practiced what I'd say, compliment my mother's table, ask Audrey about her London trip, joke with Uncle William about the Patriots. I imagined sliding back into the role they expected, and maybe, just maybe, earning a sliver of forgiveness. When I turned onto Chestnut Street, the sight of all those cars parked outside unsettled me. Audrey's Range Rover, Uncle William's Mercedes, and Jennifer's blue Audi. My chest tightened. Jennifer and I had always arrived together. Why was she already inside? I told myself not to overthink, but unease gnawed at me. Still, I carried the pie up those stone steps. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of roasting turkey from neighboring homes. Through the tall windows, I saw the glow of candles' shadows, moving laughter spilling into the night. For a fleeting moment, I let hope steady me. I rang the doorbell. The sound of laughter inside instantly died. Whispers replaced it. Footsteps approached. The heavy wooden door swung open, and there stood my parents. My mother in her pearl gray dress, diamonds glittering at her ears. My father in his blazer and tie, every inch the powerful patriarch. Their expressions matched cold, impenetrable. "Stephanie," my father said, his voice devoid of warmth. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for Thanksgiving dinner. Mom confirmed it last week." My voice shook, but I tried to keep it steady. "There has been a misunderstanding," my mother replied, her hand tightening on the frame. "You are not invited this year." The words struck me like a physical blow. I looked past them and saw the dining room table gleaming under candlelight. My mother's centerpiece of gourds and flowers sat proudly in the middle. Around it were familiar faces, Audrey, Uncle William, and most painfully, Jennifer, my my best friend, sitting in my seat. All conversation had stopped. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked curious. But Audrey and Jennifer, they looked satisfied. I brought pie. I managed holding it out like an offering. Dad's favorite. That will not be necessary, my father said flatly. We have dessert arranged. I think it would be best if you left now. Silence followed, broken only by the soft hum of music turned louder to drown out the tension. My arms grew heavy with the pie I had poured my heart into. My mother added in a voice so soft it felt rehearsed. Your choices have consequences. The door closed with finality. I stood on those steps, abandoned, erased. The home I had grown up in was alive with laughter, but not mine. Have you ever been cut out by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Tell me in the comments if you've ever been excluded from something that should have been yours, because stories like these are not mine alone. That night, as I walked back to my car, the weight of betrayal pressed down harder than the November cold. But what I didn't know yet was that this rejection was only the beginning. It wasn't just about being excluded from dinner. It was part of a larger plan, one that would reveal layers of deceit deeper than I ever imagined. The moment I saw Jennifer sitting at that table, something inside me cracked in a way I can never fully describe. She wasn't just my friend, she had been my anchor. We met in college, pulling, all-nighters, over coffee, and textbooks laughing until dawn. She knew my secrets, my dreams, the fears I never shared with anyone else. For years, she was the one person I trusted completely. And now she sat comfortably in my chair, laughing with my family as if she had always belonged there. Her betrayal cut deeper than my father's cold rejection or my mother's icy silence. Parents might turn their backs, but friends, real friends, are supposed to choose you. Jennifer had chosen them. I stood frozen on the steps, pie in hand, heart racing, trying to process what I was seeing. She looked up for a split second, our eyes meeting across the candlelit dining room. Her gaze darted away, almost instantly, shame flashing across her face before she masked it with a polite smile at something Audrey said. That single glance told me everything. She knew. She knew they were shutting me out. And she had gone along with it. The absurdity of it hit me in waves. I had dressed carefully, baked pie-rehearsed conversations, all while Jennifer, the woman I considered my sister, had taken my place without protest. I could almost hear her voice in my memory. Your family to me, Steph. A lie, it turned out. A comforting line meant to keep me close until I was no longer useful. The door slammed and I turned pride, keeping my spine straight even as my chest caved in. The walk back to my car felt endless. Each step echoed with humiliation, each breath heavier than the last. I placed the pie gently on the passenger seat, gripped the steering wheel and stared through the windshield at the house glowing warm and golden. Behind those windows they toasted, laughed, ate, and replaced me. Through the bay window I noticed something new this year, a banner hung behind my father's chair. Gold letters spelled out family first. The irony almost made me laugh. Family first as long as you obey. Family first unless you question. Family first unless you're me. As I drove aimlessly through the quiet city streets, the numbness began to shift. At first it was grief. Then it hardened into something sharper, colder. Anger, but not the kind that burns out quickly. This anger clarified, sharpened, focused. I wasn't just hurt, I was done. Because if Jennifer could betray me like this, if Audrey could sit smug at that table, if my parents could slam the door in my face, then maybe I had nothing left to lose. So, I want to ask you something, because maybe you've lived this too. Have you ever realized that the person you trusted most was standing against you all along? Tell me in the comments, because knowing we're not alone in betrayal is sometimes the only way through it. That night, sitting by the Charles River with the city lights flickering on the water, I remembered a conversation I had months earlier. A chance encounter with Michael Donovan, an old friend from my brief law school days. He worked for the SEC, now specializing in financial fraud. I had once confessed to him after a few too many glasses of wine that some of the company's accounts didn't look right. He had slid his card across the table and said, "If you ever decide to dig deeper, call me." At the time, I tucked it away, too loyal to act. But now loyalty was dead. The betrayal of Thanksgiving had killed it. and so I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and hovered over his number. My hand trembled, but my decision was clear. My family had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. The door had closed, the betrayal was complete, and I was ready to fight back. I sat in my car by the Charles River that night, the city lights flickering across the water like fractured glass. The pecan pie sat untouched beside me, a symbol of everything I had lost tradition family trust. My hands clutched the steering wheel, knuckles white, as the anger inside me shifted from raw pain to icy clarity. For years I had told myself that loyalty meant silence, that protecting my family's reputation mattered more than protecting myself. But sitting there abandoned on Thanksgiving, I realized the truth: loyalty had been nothing but a leash, and they had strangled me with it. I thought about Michael Donovan. We'd reconnected at an alumni event 3 months earlier. Over a glass of wine, I confessed that something about the firm's accounts didn't feel right. Offshore transfers, irregular movements, consolidated client accounts with no clear explanation. He had leaned in, his expression grave. "Do you have proof?" I admitted I had copied some files before leaving. He told me to call him if I ever decided to face what those numbers meant. At the time, I shoved his card into my purse, too afraid to betray my family. But now, after seeing Jennifer in my seat, after hearing my mother say, "Your choices have consequences," I knew. The real consequence of silence would be letting them get away with it. My phone felt heavy in my hand. My thumb hovered over Michael's number. Calling him would change everything. Once I crossed that line, there would be no return. My family's empire would be exposed, and I would be the one to light the match. I thought of my father's voice, sharp with contempt. "Stick to your brochures." I thought of Audrey's cold email branding me a traitor. I thought of Jennifer smiling across the table as if she hadn't gutted our friendship. And then I thought of the investors, people who trusted us, who trusted my father, who had no idea their money was being shuffled like pawns in a rigged game. The decision crystallized. I pressed call. Michael answered on the third ring, the sound of children playing faintly in the background. "Stephanie," he said warmly. "Happy Thanksgiving? Everything okay?" My voice was steadier than I expected. "Not exactly. Do you remember our conversation about those files? I think it's time I showed them to you." Silence stretched for a moment. Then his tone hardened. "This sounds serious. Once we start looking, we can't unsee what we find. Are you sure?" I glanced out at the dark water. "I'm sure. My family made their position clear tonight. Now I need to stand by mine. Tomorrow, 8 in the morning, bring everything you have. I'll be there." When I hung up, the weight in my chest shifted. I wasn't just cast out anymore. I was armed. Driving home, I passed landmarks that once held warmth: the ice cream shop where we celebrated good grades, the park where my father taught me to ride a bike. Each place whispered memories of a family I thought I had. But those memories now felt staged, like scenes in a play, designed to hide the truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Audrey. "This is for the best. You brought this on yourself. No apology, no hesitation, just judgment." I deleted it without replying. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew there was no going back. I poured myself a glass of wine, set the rejected pie on the counter, and pulled the hidden folder of documents from behind my bookshelf. I spread them across my dining table, page after page of irregularities, discrepancies, evidence. What once terrified me now fueled me. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was ready to expose it. And yet, even as I scanned those papers, I didn't realize how deep the betrayal ran. Because within those documents, buried among numbers and signatures, lay a secret far more personal than financial fraud. A betrayal so intimate it made my parents' rejection look almost merciful. Stay with me, because what I found next was not just about money or power. It was about my very identity and the people I had trusted most. The stack of documents spread across my dining table looked ordinary at first glance. Just account statements, investment reports, email chains. But as I read through them line by line, a picture began to form, a picture so dark it made my skin crawl. What started as small irregularities revealed itself as something deliberate. Withdrawals disguised as client transfers. Deposits shifted between accounts with no explanation. Offshore entities with vague names receiving large sums in patterns that were anything but random. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. My father, the man Boston revered as a financial genius, was orchestrating fraud on a massive scale. And he wasn't doing it alone. Emails between him and Audrey surfaced, written in cold, calculated language. They spoke of adjusting returns to appease nervous clients. They discussed temporary reallocations of funds that in reality looked like classic Ponzi tactics, using new client money to cover withdrawals from old ones. My sister, the golden child, wasn't just complicit, she was his partner. But the real knife to the chest came when I saw my own name. Restrict Stephanie's access to the Ferguson and Williams accounts my father had written. Her marketing role doesn't require financial detail. Audrey replied quickly, already handled. Jennifer is helping redirect her focus. Jennifer. Her name appeared over and over again, always in ways that made my stomach drop. She had been updating them on me, reporting what I said, what I noticed, what I questioned. In one email she wrote Stephanie mentioned concerns about the Osaka transfers. I emphasized confidentiality protocols, and my father's chilling response maintained normal relations with Stephanie while we assess her suspicions. We need to know exactly what she suspects and who she's spoken with. I stared at the page, my hands trembling. Jennifer, the woman who once swore she'd always be on my side, had been planted in my life as a spy. My confidant, my supposed best friend, had been working against me for months. The betrayal was staggering. Every conversation, every vulnerable moment I shared with her replayed in my mind, now twisted with her duplicity. She encouraged me to take risks to leave the firm, all while feeding every detail back to my father. And for what? For advancement. For a seat at the table. I pushed the papers aside, nauseated, pacing my apartment. My chest ached with something worse than anger. It was grief for a friendship I had already lost. Grief for the years of trust that meant nothing. But the devastation didn't stop there. In a folder labeled personal, I found screenshots and photographs. At first they looked random: Jennifer and Audrey at events, galas, vacations. But then the pattern emerged. Their closeness wasn't professional. It was intimate. The final photo made my knees buckle. Audrey and Jennifer embracing in my father's lake house, clearly unaware they were being photographed. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. Jennifer hadn't just betrayed me professionally. She had betrayed me personally, falling into a relationship with my sister while pretending to be my loyal friend. The betrayal was complete. At that moment, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever discovered that the people you loved most weren't just lying, but conspiring behind your back? What did you do? Tell me in the comments, because hearing how others face betrayal gives us all the courage to confront our own. I collapsed onto the couch, clutching the photo in my hands. The laughter I'd heard behind that door on Thanksgiving now made sense. It wasn't just about excluding me, it was about replacing me. Audrey had my father's pride. Jennifer had taken my seat at the table. Together, they had rewritten my role in the family to outsider. And yet, as broken as I felt, a new resolve began to form. I wasn't powerless. I had evidence. I had proof of their lies, their crimes, their betrayals. For the first time, the balance of power wasn't entirely theirs. The question was, would I have the courage to use it? I didn't know then that the decision was about to be forced on me. Because the very next day, my phone rang, and Michael's voice carried news that would make my blood run cold. I thought I had seen the worst of it. Discovering that my father and sister were running a fraudulent scheme was devastating enough. Learning that Jennifer, my supposed best friend, had been spying on me was unbearable. But nothing prepared me for the next revelation, the betrayal that cut deeper than all the rest. It began when my phone rang the following morning. Michael's voice was urgent. "Stephanie, I couldn't wait. I started looking into Matthew's investment group last night. There are serious red flags: offshore accounts, irregular reporting, and something else you need to hear." My heart pounded. "What is it?" "Your father transferred significant ownership shares yesterday, not just to Audrey, to someone named Jennifer Adams. Does that mean anything to you?" I nearly dropped the phone. Jennifer. My family hadn't just welcomed her socially, they had given her power, influence, and ownership in the empire that was supposed to be our legacy. She wasn't just betraying me on the sidelines, she was now part of the Matthews dynasty. But Michael wasn't finished. His tone grew graver. There was activity in a trust fund registered to you, substantial withdrawals, dual authorization required. Stephanie, did you authorize anything? The blood drained from my face. My grandparents had established that trust for me. It was untouchable until I turned 35. No, I whispered. That's impossible. They can't access it without my signature. Someone did, Michael replied. We'll need to investigate possible identity theft. I sat in silence, gripping the phone so tightly my hand ached. They hadn't just cut me out. They had stolen from me. My own blood had siphoned money from the one safeguard my grandparents had left in my name. After hanging up, I staggered to the dining table, the documents still spread out like a battlefield. I searched again more carefully this time, combing through email chains and attachments. That's when I saw it references to my trust. Mentions of moving assets temporarily to stabilize returns. My father's words were casual, clinical, but the implications were criminal. And then the dagger. Screenshots, photos, private exchanges. Evidence that Jennifer and Audrey's relationship went beyond the boardroom. They had been together behind my back for months, maybe years. Every late-night business meeting, every secretive look suddenly made sense. The realization hollowed me out. Jennifer hadn't just betrayed my friendship. She had taken my sister too. She had embedded herself so deeply into my family that I was the expendable one. Replaced as daughter, replaced as friend, erased as a person. I sat on the floor, clutching the photographs, shaking with disbelief. My mind replayed every moment Jennifer had comforted me, every time she swore she'd stand by me, every time Audrey claimed she had my best interests at heart. It had all been a script, a performance, a manipulation designed to keep me blind. But grief quickly hardened into resolve. They had underestimated me. They thought breaking my heart would break my will. They were wrong. I want to ask you something because maybe you've lived this kind of double betrayal. Have you ever discovered that two people you trusted, most family and friend, were working together against you? Tell me in the comments, because betrayal like that is too heavy to carry alone. As I gathered the papers into neat piles, my tears dried. Each document, each email, each photo was no longer just pain. They were weapons, proof, evidence strong enough to topple everything my family had built. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't the powerless one. I was holding the truth, and the truth, once released, could destroy them. But releasing it wouldn't be simple, because exposing my family meant exposing myself too to public scrutiny, to legal battles, to endless retaliation. The question wasn't just, could I use this evidence? The question was, would I be brave enough to? That decision loomed in front of me like a cliff edge, and soon I would be pushed to the brink. By the time dawn broke the next day, my apartment looked more like an evidence room than a home. Documents covered the dining table, emails were sorted into folders, and scanned copies were tucked away on encrypted drives. I had spent the entire night cataloging everything, not just to understand it, but to prepare for what I knew I had to do. 'Cause now the question wasn't if I would expose them, it was when. Michael's voice from the night before echoed in my head. Once we start looking, we can't unsee what we find. Are you sure you want to pursue this? At the time, I had said yes, but staring at my mother's face in old family photos, my father's praise from childhood report cards, Audrey's laughter from years ago, a part of me wavered. These weren't strangers I was about to destroy. They were my family. But then, like a cruel reminder, my phone buzzed. Audrey again. This is for the best. You brought this on yourself. No apology, no remorse, just blame. I deleted it instantly. The truth was unavoidable. They had already destroyed me. The night they closed the door in my face, they made their choice. And now I had to make mine. I sat at the table with a glass of wine, the pie still untouched on the counter. One by one, I reviewed the files. Account statements showing systematic fraud, emails confirming deliberate deception, screenshots proving Jennifer's role as a spy, even evidence of unauthorized withdrawals from my trust fund. The picture was airtight. They couldn't talk their way out of this. The weight of it settled over me. Once I sent this to Michael, the Matthews name would collapse. The empire my father built would be shattered. Audrey's career would implode. Jennifer's loyalty would mean nothing, and my mother's carefully maintained social image would crumble into ash. I hovered over the send button, my hand trembling. This was the point of no return. Part of me still remembered childhood Thanksgivings, the smell of turkey my father carving with pride, Audrey whispering jokes to me under the table. Could I really torch all of it? Then I remembered the cold slam of the door, my father's voice. "You're not invited," Jennifer's eyes avoiding mine. My mother's chilling words. "Your choices have consequences." Yes, they did. And so did mine. I clicked send. The file transferred. Michael had what he needed. So did the SEC. So did a handful of trusted clients who deserved to know. Within seconds, my world shifted. I felt both hollow and liberated, like I had just stepped off a cliff and discovered I could fly. I need to pause here, because this was the moment I crossed a line I could never uncross. Have you ever faced a choice so irreversible that it terrified you, but you knew deep down it was the only path forward? That's where I was. Tell me in the comments how you faced your own point of no return. Because sending those files didn't just set off an investigation. It set off a chain reaction that would rip through my family like wildfire. I thought exposing the fraud was the endgame, but it was only the beginning. So, barely 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed nonstop. My father, my mother, Audrey, even Jennifer. Messages filled with panic, rage, denial. What have you done? This is a family matter. You have no idea what you've unleashed. And then a knock at my door. When I opened it, I didn't find faceless regulators or angry investors. I found my entire family standing in the hallway, their empire collapsing behind them, and their fury aimed squarely at me. The pounding at my door came less than half an hour after I sent the files. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. My family. The very people I had just exposed to federal investigators now stood outside my apartment demanding entry. When I opened the door, the sight was surreal. My father looked disheveled for the first time in my life, his tie crooked, his face red with fury. My mother's lips trembled as she tried to hold her composure. Audrey's mascara streaked down her cheeks, her golden image cracked. And Jennifer... She lingered at the back, pale eyes swollen, a ghost of the confident woman who had replaced me at that table. "How could you do this to us, my father?" roared his voice echoing down the hall. "Do you have any idea what you've done to your own family?" I stepped aside. "If you want to talk, come inside, but you will not shout at me in my own home." They filed in reluctantly, the weight of collapse hanging over them. My small apartment felt claustrophobic, the walls pressing in with all that anger and fear. My father wasted no time. "Retract it. Call your contact at the SEC. Tell them it was a mistake. We can still contain this." I almost laughed. Retract the truth. Retract documented fraud, misappropriation, identity theft. That's not possible, Dad. My mother's mask slipped, fear glimmering in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? To our standing? Every board, every charity, every circle we've built will collapse because you couldn't stay loyal." "Loyalty," I shot back. "Was it loyalty when you raided my trust fund? When you shut me out on Thanksgiving? When Jennifer spied on me for months?" Audrey's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "You don't understand the pressure. Dad needed returns to keep the firm alive. When the market turned, we had no choice." "Don't say another word," my father barked at her. "She's probably recording this entire conversation." I didn't need to. The documents spoke louder than any recording ever could. Jennifer stepped forward, tears glistening. "Stephanie, please. This affects employees, clients, innocent people. There has to be a way to resolve this without destroying everyone." The audacity made my blood boil. "You spied on me. You used our friendship as a weapon. And all the while you were with Audrey. You betrayed me on every level. Don't talk to me about innocence." Jennifer crumpled, whispering, "It wasn't like that. Not at first," but I turned away. Then Uncle William slipped into the apartment, his expression grim. "Harold, they've already frozen the accounts." The SEC is inside the office. You need to prepare. And Stephanie, be careful. They're looking for someone to blame, and they've decided it should be you." My father's glare burned through me. "If you don't cooperate, our lawyers will have no choice but to present evidence of your involvement." "Evidence you fabricate," I replied coldly. "But it won't work. I've documented everything. Michael has the timeline. I was never a signatory on those accounts. The truth is already out." For a moment, silence choked the room. My father's face twisted, desperation leaking into his rage. "Name your price," he said finally. "Everyone has one. 1 million. 5 million. Your own division. Tell me what it takes." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not a father, but a man who believed everything could be bought. "I already have what I need," I said softly. "The truth." I want to pause here because this was the confrontation of my life. If you've ever had to stand your ground against people who tried to buy your silence, I want you to share your story. And if you believe truth is worth more than money, subscribe and stay with me because the battle wasn't over yet. Because the next words Audrey spoke shifted everything again. She reminded my father that I now controlled the Norton Trust shares powerful enough to challenge his control of the company. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about exposing fraud. It was about a power struggle that had only begun. My father's eyes burned into mine as Audrey's words hung in the air. The Norton Trust shares the leverage they hadn't considered. For the first time, he looked at me not as a disappointment, but as a threat. "Is this about power?" he demanded, his tone shifting from fury to calculation. "Do you want control of the company? Because if that's it, we can negotiate." I shook my head slowly. "This isn't about power. It's about accountability, about consequences, about all the people who trusted you with their money while you treated it like your personal piggy bank." My mother crumpled onto my couch, her carefully composed image finally cracking. "We'll be ruined," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Everything we built, everything we are, gone." Audrey knelt beside her, trying to soothe her, though her eyes darted toward me with sharp accusation. Jennifer stood near the door, caught between worlds not belonging to either. "You never should have pushed me away," I said quietly, my voice shaking with both pain and resolve. "You never should have treated me like an outsider in my own family. Maybe then I would have helped you find a way out. But you chose this. You chose lies, fraud, betrayal." My father's face twisted with desperation. His last weapon was cruelty. "You are dead to us," he spat. "After today, you are no longer a Matthews." I met his glare without flinching. "I stopped being a Matthews the moment you closed that door in my face." My voice hardened. "Now I need all of you to leave. Any further communication will go through my lawyer." Jennifer's lips parted. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she whispered, "Stephanie, please. Our friendship wasn't a lie. I cared about you. I still do. You have to believe me." I turned to her, every word sharp as glass. A real friend wouldn't have sat at that table while I was turned away. A real friend would have stood up, walked out, and chosen me. "You made your choice, Jennifer, and now you live with it." The silence was suffocating. One by one they filed out. My father stormed past me without another word. My mother hesitated at the door, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and sorrow, then followed. Audrey lingered, her lips parting as if to say something meaningful, but nothing came. She shook her head and left in silence. Jennifer was the last. She stood trembling, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I'm sorry." But the words rang hollow, echoing in the room long after she was gone. Uncle William stayed a moment longer. He placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "This will get worse before it gets better," he warned. "But you did the right thing. I should have done it myself years ago." His eyes were filled with regret, and then he too slipped out the door. When the latch clicked shut, the apartment fell into silence. For the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The family I had fought for, the family I had begged to accept me, was gone. Not in the abstract, not in whispers, but in their own words. Dead to them. And yet beneath the ache in my chest, something unexpected stirred freedom. I was no longer chained to their expectations, their corruption, their lies. The Matthews name no longer defined me. My choices did. That night I stood at my window watching the city lights flicker. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering how to please them. I was wondering how to rebuild myself. Because the truth had already been unleashed, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my new townhouse in Cambridge, arranging a bouquet of autumn flowers for the dining table. The scent of roasting turkey and fresh bread drifted through the rooms. It wasn't the grand Beacon Hill brownstone I grew up in, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, the space felt filled with something that had always been missing in my parents' house warmth. As I moved around the kitchen, I couldn't help but think back to the Thanksgiving that had changed everything. The slammed door, the cold rejection, Jennifer's eyes avoiding mine, my father's voice declaring I was no longer a Matthews. At the time, it had felt like the end of my world, and in some ways it was. But what I couldn't see then was that endings are often beginnings in disguise. The Matthews Investment Group had collapsed under the weight of its own lies. My father accepted a plea deal that kept him out of prison, but confined him to house arrest. His reputation in Boston was destroyed, his name whispered with disdain instead of reverence. My mother retreated to their lake house, unable to face the society that had once adored her. Audrey, stripped of her pedestal, started over at a small financial firm in Providence. To my surprise, she reached out months later. Therapy had softened her, humbled her. Our relationship was fragile, but real, no longer built on competition, but cautious honesty. And Jennifer, she wrote letters, sent emails, poured out apologies that I eventually answered with forgiveness, but not reconciliation. Some betrayals carve scars too deep to ever heal into friendship again. Uncle William, however, became an ally. He joined me on the restructured board of the company, this time committed to transparency. And my cousin Emma, the one who had warned me when no one else would, become my partner in my own firm, bringing her brilliance and integrity to our clients. That Thanksgiving, my table wasn't set for the family I had lost. It was set for the family I had chosen. Emma arrived first with cranberry sauce and a bottle of wine. Michael and his wife Grace came next, carrying laughter that filled the room. Uncle William brought his partner, Robert. My assistant, Bethany, who had left the family firm to join my consultancy, walked in beaming. And then, to my surprise, Audrey appeared carrying a pecan pie. She held it awkwardly, her voice trembling. I remembered it was Dad's favorite. But it's yours too. Right. The gesture nearly undid me. I nodded, tears in my eyes. Yes, thank you for remembering. As we gathered around my mismatched dining chairs, I looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight. These weren't people bound by obligation or performance. They were people who chose to stand with me when it cost them something. And that, I realized, was what family truly meant. I raised my glass. A year ago, I thought losing my family meant losing everything. Instead, it created space for something more genuine to grow. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, by love, by who shows up when it matters. The room fell silent, then filled with warmth, the kind of warmth I had never felt in Beacon Hill. Before we close, let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between loyalty to blood and loyalty to yourself? Share your story in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of betrayal, resilience, and finding freedom, subscribe and stay with me. Because the hardest choices often lead us to the truest family. That night, as laughter carried into the night and the pie was shared, I realized the cruelest Thanksgiving of my life had also been the most necessary. Because only by losing what was false could I make room for what was real. And maybe that's the message I want to leave with you. Sometimes the family you choose is far more powerful than the one you're born into. When I look back now, it's almost hard to recognize the woman I was that night on Beacon Hill. Standing on those stone steps, clutching a pie, begging silently to be let inside. I was still trying to prove I belonged to people who had already decided I didn't. That rejection was excruciating, but in many ways, it was also the gift I never knew I needed. The Matthews name once defined me. It dictated how I dressed, how I spoke, even how I smiled. I lived in fear of disappointing them, in fear of being less than. And when they closed that door, I thought my life was over. But the truth is, it had only just begun. In the year that followed, I discovered something far more precious than approval: freedom. Freedom to build a career guided by integrity. Freedom to surround myself with people who valued honesty over appearances. Freedom to choose love and loyalty that wasn't conditional. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights when the silence felt unbearable, when I longed for the family dinners I remembered from childhood, before I understood the cost of their perfection. There were mornings I doubted whether I had the strength to keep going against people who had once been my world. But every step forward, every client saved from fraud, every conversation with my chosen family proved that the path of truth, though lonely at first, always leads somewhere better. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: blood may bind us, but it doesn't define us. What defines us are the choices we make, the values we stand on, and the people we allow at our table. Because sometimes the door that closes on you is the very one that sets you free.